Hi guys, welcome back to another video. Today gonna do some more work on the Civic. I'll show you what I've got to install. So today I'm going to be installing the water temp gauge, just because the factory one doesn't have any readings on it. To install that, I've got this fitting adapter to go into the upper radiator hose. And I'm going to install this gauge where we installed the EK Civic center console. I bought this sheet of acrylic that I'm going to cut out with die grinder and wheel, and also going to use 51mm or 52mm once I cut it hole saw to make like the hole for the gauge. So in this kit we have the gauge and a mounting bracket which goes on the back there, and that pulls itself against the face. We then have the water temperature sensor itself. So this just screws into the housing we've got. Then that came with a couple hose clamps for both sides. And the temperature gauge also came with a larger bung just in case you need to step down to another size. And then the harness itself. So this is just the wiring diagram for it that we'll have to sort out. So this part is just to go into the back of the gauge and for inside the car. You'll need to buy some twin core wire to run from the holder to the car itself. This is what I got from Bunnings. I think it was about $7 for 5 meters. So it's got your negative and positive inside the one cable, so it looks tidy. So we'll be running that from this sensor into the harness on the gauge. You can connect this up to brighten when you turn your headlights on, but I just have it on all the time because it doesn't really make a difference during the day if it's lit up. So first we'll cut the radiator hose and we'll get this mounted in, and then we'll install the sensor and then run the wire into the car. So for a B16, the coolant hose size is slightly larger than an original EG radiator, which I think is 28mm or 30mm. So this has a 32mm radiator hose, so you'll need a 32mm like coolant temperature sensor adapter. So you need at least a sort of like a couple of inches of straight hose where you're gonna put it. You don't want to put it on a bend because you might struggle to seal it, and don't want to go too close to this fan. So I think just before it goes into a 90 there, I'm going to place it, and I'm going to point the sensor downwards just so the cable's not coming out the top and that's all you see. It'll look a little bit tidier if I point it downwards, and then I can run the cable inside. So I'm just going to line it up with the hose and do a cut this side and this side, because you'll need to shorten the hose about the width of this center part here. So the section I'm going to cut out is this part here, just before that bend there and away from the fan. You can put a cable tie around the hose just to mark where you're going to cut. So that's the section that's removed. Just the same width as that center point there. Pointing sensor down. Shouldn't need to re-bleed your cooling system because the thermostat's down here and the water should still be in the hose. It's just the very top of the radiator and this hose will need to refill. We've got the two new hose clamps. I just butted them up right against here and done the hose clamps up. And then our pigtail for the temperature sensor is just down there, tucked so from the front you can't even tell. So we're putting the temperature sensor on the top because on the Civic, all of the temperature sensors are just mounted on the top hose where it returns into the thermostat, and that is the water that's actually returning and going into the engine, so it would give us the actual water temperature going in. Okay, so now we're going to get to the wiring. So this is what twin core wire looks like. You've got two separate wires in there. So now we've got black and red in there. This kit came with the two terminals, so a female and a male. So what we need to do is on the plug itself, where we had our black and red wire, we need to match the black up with the black here and the red with the red here. And on the other plug you would have a female and male or male and female. You need to match the corresponding pin to that one. So on this one here, so our red wire has a male plug and our black wire has a female plug. So on this one, the black would be male and the red would be female, so it can connect together. So now we have the positive and negative terminals on here. Going to pass the wire through this grommet here. The person before me has already put wiring for the head, the fog lamp switches through there. You could also go through this body harness and just poke a hole in there. But since this one, since that one still has quite a bit of room, I'll put it through there. So with the wire, so it's plugged in, and just running it, I think I'll probably cut it about there, and that should be enough. You want to leave yourself enough room just in case you need to move the gauge or move the sensor. Now inside the car, we'll just pull the cable through. Okay, now that you've got your wire inside the car, we need to remove the center console. So I'm just going to cut a piece of acrylic to sit in there. It's actually got a lip that it can sit against, which is good. And our gauge will go in there, something like this. Okay, so I've just marked out the square I'm going to cut. Changed my mind, I'm going to use the angle grinder with the thin disc because I think I'll be able to cut it out straighter. So I've got the panel in there. I just had to grind some of the edges away to fit it in. I decided not to cut the other two out yet until I have the gauges to go in there. So for now I'll just have the one water temperature gauge, and then later I can add the holes for the other ones. So most likely my next gauge I'll put here, and then I'll do the center bit last. So at this point you're going to need to disconnect your battery. I've just popped out the radio. For wiring, I'm going to be using this yellow wire on the back of the radio, constant 12 volt source. For earth, I'm just going to make an earthing point here with a self tapper, and I'm not going to connect the illumination, the other end of our sensor here, run through. So the ground I'll attach to the grounding point I'm going to add for the gauge, and then the red I'm going to wire in for the sensor input. So I've just soldered my wire onto the yellow, which is a constant power, and I decided to use the red here, which is accessory power. So I've got my two wires here, and I'm just going to bundle it back into this loom and then run it down the bottom, and then I'll bring the wiring harness from the gauge and we'll add the ground connector and the power to here. So I've just gone through and added terminals onto the wires. So you've got ground, constant power, sensor input green, and the switched accessory power red. White is for a switched illumination power. I'm not using that. And then before I showed we have yellow with the wire coming off for constant power, and the red coming off for constant power going down there. And then I've also added some connectors onto the wire we ran in through the engine bay for our ground from the sensor and our input to our harness into the gauge. So now I'll plug everything together. So everything's plugged together. I've just added some insulation tape over each of the connectors so they don't short on anything. So I'm just going to bring the gauge over and plug it in and power on the car and see if we have a reading or the gauge is working. So I went to turn on the gauge and I couldn't get any illumination, and I've worked out that with the white wire, if you don't have it connected at all, you won't have any illumination. So what I've done is I took the accessory wire and the illumination wire and crimped them together into the same connector into the accessory power, not the main power. Otherwise the gauge will be lit up all the time. You just want it to light up when you have the car running. So the two go together. So I'll just show you what the gauge looks like. on, and then we can change the color at the back. And then key off, and the light goes away. So now I'm gonna just tidy up all the wires and put everything back, and then start the car, and we'll see if the temperature gauge starts to come up. So I've got the interior back together, and the gauge is mounted in there. I'll just turn the accessory on. Alright, it's pretty dark now, and I don't want to start the car up because the neighbours will probably get upset, but all the wiring's done. I don't see why there shouldn't be any issues as long as the sensor that we installed is working fine. I topped up the coolant again, and then another day I'll start the car and I'll see if it works. Okay, that's it. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.